Two security guards blocked my entry to my own son's wedding, showing me a photograph of myself with explicit orders. If this man attempts to enter, immediately escort him out. I watched my entire family walk through the grand doors of the ballroom while I was shoved away like a criminal, utterly humiliated in front of dozens of guests who had known me for years. My name is Elias Eli Vance Holloway. I'm 67 years old, and on April 26, 2024, I experienced the most demeaning moment of my life. I arrived at the Peachtree Grand Ballroom in Atlanta, Georgia, at 6:15 in the evening, wearing my best charcoal bespoke suit, which I had specially tailored for my son, Julian's wedding. In my inside pocket, I carried an envelope with a check for $25,000 as a gift. In my heart, I held the pure joy of seeing my only son marry Skylar Tate, the woman he claimed to love. But I never made it across those doors. As I approached the main entrance, two burly men in black suits and earpieces planted themselves in front of me with severe expressions. One of them, the taller man, pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was a photograph of me, likely taken from my social media, with my full name underneath, Eli Vance Holloway. "Are you this person?" he asked in an authoritative voice. I nodded, confused. "Yes, I am. I'm here for my son, Julian Holloway's wedding." The guard exchanged a look with his partner, then stared straight into my eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have express instructions not to allow you entry to this event." For a few seconds, I thought it was a sick joke. I let out a nervous laugh. "There must be a mistake. I'm the groom's father." "There is no mistake, sir," the second guard, younger but equally firm, replied. "Mr. Julian Holloway provided your photograph personally this morning, and he was very clear. If you attempt to enter, we must prevent it, and if necessary, escort you off the premises." I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. My son, my own son, had given specific orders to keep me out of his wedding. I tried to keep my composure. I took a deep breath. "There has to be a misunderstanding," I insisted, pulling out my phone to call Julian. "Let me speak to him." The taller guard extended his arm, physically blocking me. "Sir, I ask you to leave voluntarily, or I will be forced to request additional support." It was at that moment I saw my ex-wife, Vivian Wells, arrive with her sister. Vivian saw me. Our eyes locked for an agonizing second, and then she simply looked away, took her sister's arm, and walked past the guards without issue. The guards greeted them politely and let them enter as if nothing were happening. "Vivian!" I shouted her name, but she hurried her pace and disappeared inside the ballroom. More guests started arriving. I recognized several cousins, uncles, and family friends who had had dinner at my house hundreds of times. They all showed their invitations and walked past. Some looked at me with uncomfortable expressions. Others pretended not to recognize me. No one stopped. No one asked what was going on. Then I saw my daughter, Olivia Holloway Reed, arriving with her husband, Marcus. My heart leaped with hope. Olivia saw me immediately. Her eyes widened in surprise, but when she took a step toward me, Marcus grabbed her arm and whispered something in her ear. Olivia lowered her head and kept walking. They also let her pass without a problem. "Olivia, please," I pleaded, but she didn't turn around. The younger guard moved closer. "Sir, you are causing a scene. I ask you again to retire." "A scene?" I repeated, feeling rage bubble in my chest. "They are preventing me from entering my son's wedding. I paid for his Morehouse College tuition. I helped him buy his first car. I was there for him when no one else was. You will have to resolve that with your family, sir, but it will not be today, and it will not be here, the guard replied with professional firmness. More guests continued to arrive. Some started pulling out their phones, probably photographing or recording the situation. The humiliation was complete. Eli Vance Holloway, the black entrepreneur who had built a company, Holloway Global Imports, LLC, from the ground up, the man who had supported his family with honest work for 40 years, was being thrown out of his own son's wedding like an unwanted beggar. The taller guard spoke into his earpiece. We need support at the main entrance. We have the situation contained, but require an exit escort. 2 more guards appeared from inside the building. Now, there were 4 men surrounding me. It's not necessary, I said, raising my hands. I'll leave on my own. But they wouldn't let me leave with dignity. The 4 of them escorted me all the way to the parking lot, 1 on each side, as if I were a dangerous criminal. Arriving guests stopped to watch the spectacle. I heard murmurs, muffled laughs, the constant click of camera phones. When we reached my charcoal gray Mercedes-Benz S-Class, the original guard said, I recommend you leave the property immediately, Mr. Holloway. If you return, we will call the police. I got into the car, my hands trembling. I closed the door, and the 4 guards stood there watching, making sure I actually left. I put the key in the ignition, but I didn't start the engine. I couldn't. My vision blurred, but not from tears. It was something different. It was a cold, crystalline clarity beginning to form in my mind. I took out my mobile phone and opened the voice recorder app. I pressed the red recording button. April 26, 2024, 6:32 p.m. The Peachtree Grand Ballroom, Atlanta. I have just been physically expelled from my son Julian Holloway's wedding by 4 security guards under his express orders. Witnesses present, approximately 30 guests, including Vivian Wells, Olivia Holloway Reed, and various relatives. None intervened. I stopped the recording and saved it with the date and time. Then I took my camera out of the car and photographed the building, the entrance, and the guards still watching me from a distance. I documented everything meticulously. The guards finally turned and returned to the ballroom. I still didn't start the engine. I stayed there, sitting, watching more guests arrive, laugh, and celebrate. I could hear the music starting inside. My son was getting married at this very moment, and I was in the parking lot alone, publicly humiliated. But something strange was happening inside me. I didn't feel despair. I felt something much more dangerous. Absolute lucidity. I remained seated in my Mercedes for 40 minutes without moving a muscle. The afternoon sun streamed through the windshield, casting patterns of light on my quiet hands on the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't punch anything. I simply let my mind work, reconstructing the last 8 months as if they were pieces of a puzzle that were finally beginning to make sense. August 2023. That was the first time Julian mentioned Skylar Tate. We had planned to have lunch at our usual spot, the Foundry Grill, as we did every Sunday since he moved into his own apartment. He arrived 30 minutes late, which was unusual for him, and throughout the meal, he kept looking at his mobile phone with a foolish smile on his face. I met someone, Dad, he told me between bites of his fried chicken. Her name is Skylar. She's incredible. I remember being genuinely happy. My son was in his late 30s and had had few serious relationships. Tell me about her, I asked, with sincere interest. We met at a coffee shop near my office. She accidentally spilled her latte on my documents. He laughed, that nervous laugh of a recently smitten man. She's a yoga instructor. She's 35. She's sweet and understanding. A casual meeting. How convenient. How perfectly orchestrated, I thought now with clarity. September 2023. Julian canceled 3 consecutive Sunday lunches. Skylar and I have plans, he said each time. It didn't bother me then. A son in love is normal. But now, I remembered the slightly defensive tone in his voice, as if he expected me to protest when I never had. October 2023. I met Skylar for the first time. Julian brought her to my house for dinner one Friday night. She was beautiful. I couldn't deny that. Long brown hair, calculating green eyes, a perfectly practiced smile. She presented herself as charming. She asked about my import business with apparent interest. She praised my house, my taste, my achievements. Mr. Holloway, Julian has told me so much about you, she said while I was pouring a glass of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. You must be so proud of everything you've built. Something in her gaze made me uneasy that night, but I ignored it. I attributed my distrust to the natural jealousy of a father seeing another woman occupy his son's heart. How naive I was. November 2023. Julian started making strange comments about modern financial planning and freeing up lifetime assets. He was having dinner at my place when he blurted out, "Dad, a lot of progressive parents transfer properties to their kids before a certain age. It's more tax efficient." I looked at him, surprised. Julian had never shown any particular interest in my assets. "When the time comes, everything will be in order," I replied calmly. "There's no rush." His expression shifted slightly. Irritation. It only lasted a second, but I saw it. Now sitting in this parking lot, that micro-expression took on a completely different meaning. December 2023. Christmas. I invited the whole family to dinner. Julian, Skylar, Olivia with her husband, even Vivian, because we had always maintained a cordial relationship after the divorce. I prepared a prime rib roast, bought expensive wines, and decorated the house in a way I hadn't in years. During dinner, I witnessed something I didn't understand then, but now shone with blinding clarity. Vivian and Skylar retreated together to the kitchen to help with dessert. When I went in to get more ice, I found them talking in low voices. They abruptly fell silent when they saw me. Vivian had a hand on Skylar's arm in a gesture of familiarity that was strange for 2 people who supposedly barely knew each other. "I was just explaining where the dessert plates are," Vivian said quickly. I accepted the explanation. I didn't question anything. How foolish I was. January 2024. Julian announced his engagement. Only 5 months had passed since they met. "When you know, he told me, with the artificial certainty of someone repeating words that have been put into their head. I congratulated him, hugged him, and gave him my full blessing. I even offered to pay for part of the wedding. "It won't be necessary, Dad," he replied, almost curtly. "Skylar and I want to do it our own way." February 2024. The Sunday lunches disappeared completely. Julian stopped returning my calls as often as usual. When I finally managed to speak to him, his answers were monosyllabic, rushed. "I'm busy with wedding preparations, Dad. We'll talk later." March 2024, 1 month before the ceremony. I called Julian to ask about practical details, exact timing and dress code, if he needed help with anything. He cut me off mid-sentence. "Dad, why do you always have to control everything? We'll send you the information." I was paralyzed. The phone in my hand. My son had never spoken to me like that. When I tried to ask him what I had done wrong, he hung up. Now, sitting in my car, listening to the distant echo of celebratory music, all these pieces clicked into place, forming a monstrous picture. It hadn't been neglect. It hadn't been unnatural drifting apart. It had been a strategy. Someone had been systematically working to separate my son from me, month after month, piece by piece, until this moment arrived, my public expulsion from his life. But here was the detail they didn't know about me. Eli Vance Holloway hadn't built a successful company by being naive. I hadn't survived 40 years in the business world without developing sharp instincts. And those instincts had been whispering warnings for months. Now they stopped whispering and started shouting. I took out my phone again. I had several unread messages, but I ignored all of them except one. It was from Damon Dax Evans, my lawyer for 20 years, and also my friend. His message read, "Eli, I just got to the ballroom and they won't let me in. The guards say my name is on an exclusion list. What the hell is going on?" I smiled, a cold, calculated smile. Dax had been excluded too. That was a serious tactical error on the part of whoever was orchestrating this. An error that provided me with a powerful ally. I typed my response. "Meet me at my house in 1 hour. We have a lot to talk about." I started the engine. Finally, I looked one last time towards the building where my son was celebrating without me. But I didn't feel self-pity. I felt something much more dangerous for my hidden enemies. I felt absolute clarity and renewed purpose. I drove through the streets of Atlanta with a calm that even surprised me. The afternoon traffic flowed slowly. People walked along the sidewalks, enjoying the spring weather, oblivious to the silent earthquake that had just shaken my existence. But my mind was not in the present. It was 3 moves ahead, planning every step like a chess match where I had just lost my queen, but still had all my rooks. I arrived at my house in the Oakwood Lakes subdivision at 7:40 p.m., the home I had bought in 1992 with my first major bank loan when Julian was barely 6 and Olivia was 8. 2 stories, a front yard, a double garage, 32 years of memories ingrained in every brick. I went straight up to the 2nd floor to my private study. I locked the door, something I rarely did. I walked to the built-in closet in the back, moved 4 boxes of old documents, and pressed the false panel I had installed years ago. The small secret compartment opened, revealing my private safe. I entered the combination 081274. My mother's birthday, 15 years after she passed away. The mechanism turned smoothly, and the door opened. Inside was exactly what I needed. Meticulously organized folders, each labeled and dated. Wills, property deeds, corporate documents for Holloway Global Imports, LLC, insurance policies, bank certificates. I took everything to the desk and began to review it page by page. My current will, drafted in 2019, divided my assets equally between Julian and Olivia. The company was left under Julian's majority control, with 51% of the shares, 3 real estate properties, investment accounts, everything distributed with mathematical fairness. I took out a new notepad and began taking notes with my Mont Blanc fountain pen. A gift from my late father. I wrote names, dates, figures, and calculated updated values. The company was worth approximately $5.5 million, according to the last audit. The properties added another $1.5 million. Investments and savings completed the total at $7 million. I looked at the clock. 7:58. Dax would arrive at any moment, but before that, I needed to do something crucial. I took out my phone and dialed a number I had saved under the generic name Professional Services. It answered on the 3rd ring. Levante Investigations Agency. Good evening. This is Eli Holloway. I need to confirm immediate availability. One moment, Mr. Holloway. I heard keyboard clicking. Yes, sir. The report you requested in November is complete. We have everything documented photographically and with verifiable time records. I closed my eyes, feeling a bitter mix of satisfaction and pain. I had been right. My instincts hadn't failed me. I need 3 physical hard copies and 1 encrypted digital copy. Deliver them tomorrow before noon to my lawyer, Damon Evans's office. I'll text you the address. Understood, Mr. Holloway? I apologize for the circumstances. I hung up. Apologies change nothing. Facts are facts. The doorbell rang at 8:11 p.m. I went downstairs and opened the door. Dax was there, in his wrinkled navy blue suit, tie loosened, his expression a mix of confusion and fury. He was 52, his typically perfectly styled gray hair, now messy from repeatedly running his hands through it. Eli, what the hell happened today? I ushered him in and locked the door. Coffee? Or something stronger? Something stronger, definitely. I poured generous glasses of brandy Cardinal Mendoza in the living room. Dax sank into the leather sofa as if carrying the weight of the world. I sat in the armchair across from him with the upright posture I had maintained for 40 years while leading difficult business meetings. Tell me exactly what happened when you arrived, I asked him. Dax took a long drink before answering. I arrived at 6:30. I showed my invitation at the entrance. The guard consulted a tablet, made a quick call, and then informed me there was a problem with my access. I insisted. He insisted more. Finally, he told me clearly that my name was on a list of people unauthorized to enter. I tried to call Julian. He didn't answer. I called Vivian. She answered. Dax paused significantly. She told me, word for word, Dax, it's best you don't come. Things are complicated, and your presence will only make the situation worse. When I asked what situation, she hung up. I nodded slowly, processing. Vivian was expecting your call. She knew you would try to enter. Exactly my conclusion. Dax observed me with professional intensity. Eli, this was coordinated. It's not an emotional outburst from stressed out, soon-to-be married people. Now, someone specifically planned to exclude both of us. I stood up and went upstairs to retrieve the portable safe where I had placed the documents. I returned and set it on the coffee table between us. I opened it, revealing the organized folders. Dax, remember our conversation last November? His expression changed. When you asked me about the legality of hiring private investigators for family matters. Correct. You told me that as long as it didn't violate legally protected privacy, it was perfectly valid. I took out one of the folders and handed it to him. I didn't ignore your advice. Dax opened the folder and began to read. His face went from curiosity to surprise, then to absolute shock. Inside were dated photographs, records of meetings, excerpts of conversations in public places, all legally compiled by professionals. My God, he whispered. Skylar and Vivian. They knew each other before. Since March 2022, to be exact, I confirmed. 14 months before Julian supposedly met Skylar by accident in a coffee shop. Dax continued reading, page after page. Photographs of Vivian and Skylar having lunch together at discreet restaurants, records of frequent telephone calls between them, a particularly revealing meeting at a notary public's office in June 2022. This is... Dax searched for words. This is premeditated conspiracy. That's exactly what it is. I poured myself more brandy. I needed something in my hands to keep them occupied. When Julian started distancing himself in September, when his comments about assets started in November, when I saw that strange exchange between Vivian and Skylar at Christmas, my internal alarms went off. And you hired Levante Investigations. I did. I asked them to investigate discreetly, but thoroughly. Any prior connection between Skylar Tate and my family. It cost me $12,000, but it was worth every penny. Dax closed the folder and looked at me with renewed respect. Most people in your situation would have gone into denial. They would have wanted to believe in good faith. I'm not most people. My voice came out harder than intended. I built my company by detecting patterns in complex markets, identifying risks before they materialized. Those skills don't turn off when you come home. So today wasn't a surprise to you. The specific humiliation was, I admitted. I didn't anticipate such public cruelty, but the distancing, the underlying betrayal? No, that didn't surprise me. Dax leaned back, processing all the information. What's your plan? I smiled without humor. That's why I need you here. Tomorrow we will begin concrete legal actions, complete modification of the will, corporate restructuring, asset protection, everything legally shielded against any future challenge. That will take time and extensive documentation. We have time. Julian is on his honeymoon in the Maldives for 2 weeks. By the time he returns, the new legal structures will already be in effect. Dax nodded slowly, his legal mind already calculating steps. You'll need independent witnesses for some documents. I have them. I thought of Clarence C.J. Jefferson, my friend of 50 years. People who cannot be manipulated or bought. We sat in silence for several minutes, drinking brandy, letting the weight of everything settle. Finally, Dax spoke. Eli, this is going to hurt a lot. It already hurts, I replied with brutal honesty. But pain without action is just suffering. Pain with purpose is justice. The morning of April 27th dawned with clear skies that contrasted brutally with the storm brewing inside me. Dax arrived at my house at 9 o'clock, punctual as always, with his worn leather briefcase and the expression of a lawyer ready for war. But we weren't alone. With him came a man I had only seen twice before. Leon Lee Thompson, the private investigator from Levante Investigations. Lee was in his 40s, average build, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing him, exactly the perfect profile for his profession. He carried a metal suitcase that he set on my dining room table with ceremonial care. Mr. Holloway, he greeted me with a firm handshake. I have the complete report you requested in November, plus additional material I deemed relevant. Additional material? I repeated as I poured coffee for the three of us. Explain yourself. Lee opened the suitcase, revealing color-coded folders, labeled USB drives, and a tablet. When you hired me to investigate possible prior connections between Skylar Tate and your family, I established standard discrete surveillance. But as the investigation progressed, certain patterns emerged that justified expanding the scope. Dax and I exchanged glances. What kind of patterns? The lawyer asked. Lee turned on the tablet and projected the screen onto the dining room's white wall using a small portable projector. A detailed timeline appeared. March 2022. Skylar Tate attends a charity event at the Mandarin Oriental, Atlanta. The event was raising funds for cancer research. Her ticket cost $200. For someone who declares annual income of $22,000 as a yoga instructor, that's a considerable expense. The image changed, showing a photograph of Skylar in an elegant dress, smiling alongside other women. Among them, unmistakable, was Vivian. Vivian Wells also attended the same event, Lee continued. Both were photographed together on 3 occasions during the evening. Here, and here, he pointed to the images. Body language indicates familiarity. They are not strangers casually meeting. I felt my jaw clench. Dax was taking notes frantically in his legal pad. How did you obtain these photographs? I asked. The event had a professional photographer hired. The images were published in the local magazine, Atlanta Magazine's Society section. Completely legal public access. Lee advanced the presentation. But here's where it gets interesting. The next image showed a telephone call log, partially censored numbers, but with clear dates and durations. Between April and July 2022, Skylar and Vivian maintained 37 documented telephone calls, durations between 5 and 42 minutes. I obtained these records through a legal request to a phone company after you authorized the expanded scope investigation in January of this year. 37 calls. They weren't casual acquaintances. They were active conspirators. Continue, I said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. May 2022. Lee showed a photograph of a professional building facade. Both visited the offices of Notary Public Arthur Sterling on Peachtree Street. They arrived together at 11:15 a.m. They remained inside for 1 hour and 7 minutes. They left together. I documented their entry and exit. Dax stopped writing abruptly. A notary. Do you have any idea what kind of documentation they processed? Negative. Notarial professional secrecy is impenetrable without a court order. But the fact that they went together suggests collaboration on some type of legal or financial document. My mind worked at breakneck speed. What documents require a notary? Wills, powers of attorney, real estate contracts, assignment of rights. August 2022 to July 2023, Lee continued. The calls between them become less frequent, but longer. In-person meetings documented on 6 occasions, always in discrete locations, far from their usual neighborhoods, peripheral restaurants, coffee shops in distant commercial areas. More photographs paraded by Vivian and Skylar on terraces, in parking lots, always with serious expressions, leaning in for intimate conversation. August 2023, the critical moment. The image changed to a photographic sequence, taken from an elevated angle. Aroma Coffee Shop in Midtown Central. This is Skylar entering at 10:40 a.m. on August 15th. She orders a latte. She sits at a table by the window. The next photo shows a young man entering. My heart stopped. It was Julian. Your son, Julian Holloway, enters at 10:52, orders a black coffee, and heads toward the tables. The photographic sequence showed what happened next with brutal, documentary clarity. Skylar accidentally spilled her drink just as Julian walked nearby. An exaggerated look of surprise. Apologies. Julian helping her clean up. Conversation, smiles, exchange of phone numbers. The whole encounter lasted 14 minutes, Lee explained, with a professionally neutral voice. But here's the critical detail. The image zoomed in on the background of one of the photographs. There, seated at a distant table, but with a direct line of sight to Skylar and Julian, was Vivian, watching, controlling. Vivian was present throughout the entire supposedly casual meeting. She never approached, never acknowledged either of them. She simply observed, paid her bill, and left 3 minutes after your son walked out. The silence in my dining room was deafening. Dax had stopped writing, looking at the images with professional horror. I felt as if someone had emptied all the air from my lungs. This was theater, I finally whispered, choreographed down to the last detail. Correct, Lee confirmed. And there's more. I continued discreet surveillance on the Skylar during the following months. Her officially declared income does not support her level of expenses. Someone is financing her. Vivian, I said immediately. My ex-wife receives generous alimony from me, $15,000 monthly, according to our divorce agreement. Dax intervened, his voice tense. Eli, this builds a case for undue influence and potential fraud. If we can prove that Vivian used financial resources derived from your divorce settlement to finance a conspiracy aimed at manipulating your son and potentially altering asset distributions, we have a legal basis for multiple actions, including modification or cancellation of alimony obligations, I completed. Lee closed the presentation. I have 73 pages of additional documentation, partial bank statements obtained legally, testimonies from third parties who witnessed encounters, GPS records when Skylar used location-enabled apps, everything admissible in court if necessary. I stood up and walked toward the window. My front yard looked peaceful, flowers I had planted the year before blooming, oblivious to the human drama. For 14 months, while I worked, built, and lived my life believing in the basic goodness of my family. Two women had meticulously conspired to destroy the relationship between father and son. Not out of random cruelty, but out of cold financial calculation. $7 million. That was the price they had placed on my paternal love. Lee, I said, without turning around, prepare 3 complete physical copies of the dossier. One for Dax, one for me, and one for secure custody in a bank safe deposit box. Understood. Dax, I turned now, and my lawyer must have seen something in my expression because he stiffened. I want you to prepare legal documentation for 3 simultaneous actions. First, complete modification of the will, removing Julian as the primary beneficiary. Second, corporate restructuring of Holloway Global Imports, LLC, transferring control to a trust with Olivia as the beneficiary. Third, a formal lawsuit against Vivian for fraudulent use of alimony. That will declare total war, Eli. They declared war 2 years ago. I replied coldly. I'm simply responding to the attack. After Dax and Lee left with their respective copies of the dossier, I remained alone in my house, which suddenly seemed too large and silent. It was 11:30 a.m. on April 27th. My son was probably at some airport heading to the Maldives with his new wife, oblivious to the legal avalanche about to be unleashed on his future. I slowly walked up the stairs to the second floor, but this time I didn't go to my study. I walked down the hall to the last door on the left, the room that had been Julian's for 18 years before he moved into his own apartment. It had remained untouched since then, turned into a kind of involuntary sanctuary of his childhood and adolescence. I opened the door. The familiar smell of wood and old books hit me with unexpected force. The single bed, still covered with the navy blue comforter Julian had chosen at 13, the desk where he had done his high school homework, the shelves full of basketball trophies, family photographs in cheap frames, university textbooks he never took with him. I sat in the desk chair, the same one where I had sat countless nights helping him with math problems, listening to his teenage worries about exams and girls. I opened the top drawer. Inside, I found exactly what my memory recalled. Old notebooks, dry pens, and a small rusted metal box. The box had been my gift to him for his 10th birthday. For your most important treasures, I had told him. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was an eclectic collection of objects with no monetary value, but loaded with meaning. A ticket stub from his first professional basketball game we went to together, a faded photograph of the two of us at the beach when he was 8, his Morehouse College graduation medal, and a handwritten letter I wrote to him on his 21st birthday. I carefully pulled out the letter. The yellowed paper rustled softly. My own handwriting, firmer 17 years ago, filled the page. Dear Julian, today you turn 21 and officially become a man under the law. But to me, you will always be that boy who asked me at age 5 why the sky was blue and who wasn't satisfied with my first answer. You have always sought to understand the world deeply. That curiosity, that need for truth, is your greatest strength. Never lose it. Never allow others to tell you what to think without questioning it first. Your mind is your most valuable tool. With all my eternal love, Dad. The words burned me now with cruel irony. I had taught him to question, to seek truth, and yet he had blindly accepted the lies he had been fed about me. Where had I failed? At what moment had my teaching turned into a vacuum? I closed the box and returned it to the drawer. I looked around the room, forcing myself to recall specific moments with a new perspective. That corner where we had built his first computer together when he was 15, spending a whole Saturday connecting cables and celebrating when it finally booted up. The wall where he had hung the giant Michael Jordan poster that I bought after searching for it in 5 different stores because it was sold out. Every object, every corner, held the memory of a dedicated, present, loving father. Not perfect. I had never claimed perfection, but genuinely committed to my son's well-being. How had it been so easy to erase all that? I stood up and walked to the closet. I opened it, finding old clothes Julian had left behind. High school jackets, faded sports shirts. On the same shelf, hidden behind a shoebox, I saw a blue folder I didn't remember. I took it down and opened it on the bed. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all written by me to Julian during the 3 years he studied at Morehouse College in Atlanta. One a week without fail, from September 2003 to June 2006. 156 handwritten letters. He had saved them. All these years he had carefully preserved them, organized by date. I took one at random, dated October 2004. Son, you mentioned in your last call that you feel lost with your business administration major, that you doubt if it's really your path. Let me tell you something I learned late in life. Professional success without personal satisfaction is a gilded cage. If business administration doesn't fill your soul, there's no shame in changing. I will support you in any decision you make, as long as it's honest with yourself. I remembered that letter. I remembered Julian's distressed phone call, his doubts, my own memories of uncertainty at his age. In the end, he had continued with business administration, but because he reached his own conclusion, not because I pressured him. I picked up another one. March 2005. Julian, your mother called me worried because you broke up with Marta. I know it hurts now, but young love rarely survives distance and personal growth. Don't close your heart because of this experience. Every relationship teaches us something about ourselves. You are young, honorable, and smart. True love will come when the time is right. Ironic. I had tried to teach him about true love, about not closing his heart. And now he was married to a woman who had chosen him not out of love, but out of meticulous financial calculation. I returned the letters to their folder, feeling an overwhelming weight in my chest. This room represented 18 years of dedicated fatherhood. The letters represented 3 more years of connection, maintained from a distance. 21 years of genuine effort erased in 8 months of systematic manipulation. I went back down to the first floor and headed to the kitchen. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet, was a photograph of our last Christmas together as an apparently functional family. December 2023. We were all smiling for the camera. Me, Julian, Skylar, Olivia, her husband, and even Vivian. But now, looking with eyes opened by Lee's revelations, I saw details I had ignored. Skylar had a hand on Julian's shoulder in a gesture that looked affectionate but was possessive. Vivian was looking toward me with an expression I had interpreted as distant cordiality, but now I recognized as contained triumph. Olivia looked uncomfortable, her smile forced, her posture tense. Even then, the cracks were there. I had simply chosen not to see them. My phone vibrated, pulling me out of my thoughts. A message from Dax. First meeting with Notary Public Arthur Sterling. Schedule Monday, April 30th, 9 a.m. I will need your presence and 2 trusted independent witnesses. Can you provide names? I responded immediately. Clarence C.J. Jefferson, 50-year friend, retired business owner, completely trustworthy. I will send you his contact information. C.J. I needed to talk to C.J. He was the only person outside of Dax who knew the whole family history, who had been present at key moments and whose loyalty had never been in doubt. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring with a groggy voice, like someone who had just woken up from a nap. "Eli, how was Julian's wedding? Sorry I couldn't make it. You know how my knees are lately." "CJ," I said in a voice that surprised me with its firmness, "I need to see you today. It's urgent. Can you come to my house this afternoon?" Brief silence. CJ and I had been friends since 1975. He knew my tones, my silences, my real urgencies versus my exaggerations. "I'll be there at 5, he replied without asking more. I hung up and looked at the clock. 3 hours. 3 hours to organize my thoughts, prepare the documentation, and decide exactly how to explain to my oldest friend that my family had been conspiring against me for 2 years while I remained blind. I returned to Julian's room one last time. I stood in the doorway, simply watching. Tomorrow the legal process would begin that would irreversibly change the structure of my family. But today, for these last few hours, I could allow myself to remember the son I had raised before he became the stranger who had thrown me out of his wedding. Clarence C.J. Jefferson arrived at my house at exactly 5 p.m., driving his well-maintained silver Lexus sedan, which he refused to trade in despite my insistence on safety. He was 69, 3 years older than me. He walked with a slight limp from a recent knee surgery, but his mind was still razor sharp. We had known each other since 1975, when we were both young, idealistic salesmen at the same textile company. I greeted him at the door, and his expression changed immediately when he saw my face. 50 years of friendship teach you to read emotional states without the need for words. "What happened?" he asked directly as he stepped inside. I led him to the living room, where I had prepared coffee and cognac, knowing we would need both. CJ settled into his usual armchair, the brown leather one by the window overlooking the backyard. I sat across from him with the complete investigator's folder on the table between us. "Julian's wedding was yesterday," I began without preamble. "They wouldn't let me in." CJ frowned, confused. "What do you mean they wouldn't let you in? You're his father?" "Exactly. Security guards had my photograph with explicit instructions to remove me if I attempted entry, instructions given personally by my son." I watched as CJ processed the information, disbelief battling logic. There has to be some explanation, some monumental misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding. I pushed the folder toward him. There is a premeditated conspiracy that began in March 2022. For the next 40 minutes, CJ reviewed every page of the dossier while I narrated the complete chronology. The photographs from the charity event, where Skylar and Vivian met, the phone records, the joint visit to the notary public, the orchestrated meeting at the coffee shop, Vivian's constant surveillance for months. CJ didn't interrupt once. That was his way, absorbing the information completely before formulating an opinion. When he finally closed the folder, he poured himself a generous cognac and took a long drink. "I recognize that woman," he finally said, his voice tense. I leaned forward. "Which one?" "Skylar Tate." CJ pointed to one of the photographs where she was having lunch with Vivian at a peripheral restaurant. "May 2022, according to the date here. I saw them. I felt as if someone had turned a bright spotlight on a dark room." "You saw them together?" "Yes. Remember that Saturday we went to visit my cousin's vineyard in North Georgia wine country? We stopped for lunch at that little restaurant in the town, the Vintner's Cellar?" I remembered perfectly. It had been a pleasant trip, wine tasting, conversations about eventual retirement. I remember. "Well, while you were in the restroom, I saw your ex-wife, Vivian. enter the restaurant with a young woman I didn't recognize. They sat at a table in the opposite corner, quite separated. It seemed strange to me because Vivian saw me, but she pretended not to recognize me. She just looked away and kept walking. "Why didn't you say anything?" CJ shrugged with an apologetic gesture. I thought maybe she was with a friend and didn't want an awkward social encounter. You know how these things are after a divorce. I didn't think anything of it. He paused. "Now I wish I had mentioned it. It's not your fault," I assured him. Although a part of me wondered what would have happened if CJ had commented on that casual observation. Would I have investigated then? Would I have discovered the conspiracy before it took deep root? Was there anything else? CJ continued, frowning, as if trying to recover a blurred memory. The way they interacted wasn't casual conversation between friends. It was intense. Vivian had documents on the table, papers that the other woman, Skylar, was apparently reviewing closely. It looked more like a business meeting than a social lunch. May 2022, I repeated, reviewing the chronology mentally. 1 month after their initial meeting at the charity event, weeks after the 37 documented phone calls, and in the same month, they jointly visited the notary public. "What do you think they were planning exactly?" CJ asked. "I believe," I replied, choosing my words carefully, "that Vivian identified a vulnerability in Julian. Our son is 38 years old. He's had few serious relationships. He's emotionally receptive. Vivian knows his psychology perfectly because she raised him. Mom. She recruited Skylar, probably promising her a percentage of the eventual assets. And together they designed an infiltration strategy. But why? Vivian receives generous alimony from you. Julian was already in your will. Because greed has no logical limits, CJ. And because after the divorce, Vivian never truly forgave me for successfully rebuilding my life while she remained stuck. This isn't just about money. It's about control, power, revenge. CJ nodded slowly. I've seen similar cases in my business life. Partners who conspire for years over old resentments disguised as financial logic. We sat in silence for several minutes. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows. I heard the ticking of the wall clock that had belonged to my father, a retirement gift from his company after 35 years of service. Generational continuity that was now abruptly broken. What are you going to do? CJ asked. I finally explained the plan. Complete modification of the will. Corporate restructuring, the lawsuit against Vivian. I needed independent witnesses for the legal documentation. I needed his testimony about the encounter he had witnessed in North Georgia. Of course, I'll testify, he replied without hesitation. But Eli, this will destroy any possibility of future reconciliation with Julian. Julian destroyed that possibility when he put guards with my photograph at the entrance of his wedding, when he chose to publicly humiliate me without even asking my side of any accusation they had fed him. My voice sounded harder than intended. You can't reconcile with someone who sees you as an obstacle to eliminate instead of a father to respect. CJ leaned forward, hands clasped. Have you considered that Julian might be genuinely manipulated? That maybe he doesn't completely understand what he's doing? I've considered everything, I admitted. And yes, it's possible that Skylar and Vivian poisoned him against me with lies. But CJ, he is a 38-year-old adult, not a confused teenager. At some point, people must be responsible for their decisions, even when those decisions are influenced by others. That is true. And here is the crucial point. If he genuinely loved me, if our relationship had a genuine foundation, he would have come to talk to me before taking such a drastic measure as throwing me out of his wedding. The fact That he didn't even give me a chance to defend myself tells me everything I need to know about the value he places on our father-son relationship. CJ nodded with comprehensive sadness. So, this is about teaching him a lesson. This is about protecting myself and my assets from people who proved willing to conspire for years to obtain them. The lesson is a consequence, not the main objective. And Olivia, where is she in all this? Olivia, I sighed. She's complicated. She was at the wedding. She saw me being removed and said nothing. But I have to believe that Vivian has also manipulated or threatened her in some way. I plan to contact her soon, give her a chance to explain herself, to choose the right side before legal actions become irreversible. That's wise. CJ stood up with effort, his operated knee protesting. He walked to the window, looking at the yard where his own children had played with mine decades ago. Family barbecues, birthday celebrations, shared Christmases, 50 years of intertwined history. I'll be with you every step of the way, he said without turning around. I'll testify, I'll sign documents, I'll do whatever you need. But Eli, promise me one thing. What? Don't let this turn you into a bitter person. I've seen good men destroyed, not by the betrayals they suffered, but by the bitterness they chose to carry afterward. I stood up and walked next to him in front of the window. I'm not seeking bitterness, CJ. I'm seeking justice and protection. There's a difference. There is. Just make sure you don't forget which is which. Sunday, April 28th, dawned gray and rainy, weather that perfectly reflected my internal state. I had slept barely 3 hours, my mind constantly replaying the dossier photographs, the dates, the secret meetings. But this was no time for weakness. I had specific tasks to complete before the meeting with the notary public. At 6:30 a.m., my phone vibrated with an unexpected message. It was from Olivia. Dad, I need to talk to you. Can I come over this morning, please? I looked at the message for a long minute. Olivia had been at the wedding. She had witnessed my humiliation and had kept walking. Part of me wanted to ignore her request, to make her wait, to feel even a fraction of the pain I had experienced. But she was my daughter, and according to CJ's words, I had to give her a chance to explain before everything became irreversible. I replied, come at 9, just you, without Marcus. Her response was immediate. Thank you. I'll be there. I spent the next 2 hours mentally and emotionally preparing for a confrontation I knew would be difficult. I brewed strong coffee, tidied the living room, and placed a copy of the dossier in the study in case I needed to show it to her. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would she come to justify her cowardice, to defend her mother and brother, or would there be something more? At 9:05, I heard a car stopping in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Olivia getting out of her red-seat sedan. Even from a distance, I could see she looked terrible. Deep dark circles under her eyes, her hair carelessly pulled back, her clothes wrinkled. This was not the meticulous Olivia I knew. I opened the door before she could ring the bell. We stood looking at each other for an eternal few seconds. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. Dad, she started, but her voice broke. Come in, I said in a neutral tone. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Olivia walked in, and I led her to the living room. She sat on the edge of the sofa, tense posture, hands twisting a paper tissue. I sat in the armchair across from her, maintaining a deliberate physical distance. Explain yourself, I said without preamble. Tears began streaming down her cheeks. Dad, I am so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't do anything when I saw you there with the guards. I'm sorry I was such a coward. Why? I asked, my voice cutting. Why didn't you do anything? I'm your father. You saw me being removed, like a criminal, and you just kept walking? Because Mom threatened me, she blurted out between sobs. 2 weeks ago, Mom came to my house and told me that if I tried to contact you or defend you in any way, she would make sure Julian completely cut me off. She said she would convince Julian to exclude me from your will, that she would ruin my relationship with my brother, that I would be left alone without a family. I leaned forward. And you believed her? Yes, because I know Mom. When she decides to destroy something, she does it meticulously. She already did it with your marriage, Dad. Do you remember how she convinced half the neighborhood that you were the villain during the divorce? She has that power of manipulation. So, you chose to protect yourself by sacrificing me. Olivia hid her face in her hands. I know I was horrible. But Dad, you have to understand that I was terrified, and I didn't know what else to do. What else did you know? I pressed. About Skylar, about the plans, about all this? Olivia looked up, surprised. How do you know there's something to know? Answer the question. She took a deep breath, wiping her tears. 6 months ago, in October, I went to visit Mom. Skylar was there. It seemed strange to me because Mom had never mentioned that they were close friends. I heard them talking in the kitchen about you, about your assets, about how Julian was finally aligning with their plans. And you didn't tell me anything. I confronted Mom. I asked her what they were planning. She laughed and said it was none of my business, that I would have my share, and I should stay out of it if I knew what was good for me. Olivia twisted her hands. I tried to talk to Julian, but he was already completely under Skylar's influence. He told me that you were selfish, that you had never truly appreciated the family, that it was time for him to take control of his future. He told you that? Julian said I was selfish? Yes, and worse. He said you had always prioritized your business over the family, that Mom had suffered years of emotional neglect, that you had been an absentee father. Her voice trembled. I tried to defend you. I reminded him of all the times you were present, the basketball games, the help with homework, how you paid for his entire university education. But it was like talking to a wall. He had a prepared answer for everything. I got up and walked to the window, needing a moment to process. Julian had been completely reprogrammed. Every positive memory reinterpreted as negative. Every act of paternal love distorted into neglect. Why are you coming now? I asked without turning around. What changed? Last night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing you standing there outside the ballroom. The look on your face when Mom walked past you without saying anything. And I realized that I had become exactly the kind of person I despise. A coward, selfish, willing to sacrifice what was right for convenience. I turned back to her. Are you willing to testify about what you heard? About the conversations between your mother and Skylar? About the threats Vivian made to you? Olivia paled. Testify legally? I'm initiating multiple legal actions. Will modification, business restructuring, a lawsuit against your mother for fraudulent use of alimony? I need witnesses. I need people willing to tell the truth under oath. She remained silent for a long minute, an internal battle visible on her face. Finally, she nodded. I'll do it. I'll testify. I'll say everything I know. That will cost you your relationship with your mother, and probably with Julian. I already lost my father once to cowardice, she said, her voice firmer. I won't make the same mistake again. I sat down again, this time closer. Olivia, I need you to understand something. The decisions I am making are permanent. Julian will be removed from my will. He will not inherit the company. The changes will not be reversible, even if he later repents or discovers the truth. I understand. Truly, because it means your brother will live without the financial safety net he always assumed he'd have. It means that when Skylar inevitably leaves him, upon discovering there's no easy fortune, he will be alone facing the consequences. Olivia looked directly at me. Dad, Julian is an adult. He made adult decisions with adult consequences. You didn't do anything to him. He did something horrible to you. He deserves to face the result of his actions. I nodded slowly. Those were the words I needed to hear. There's something else you should know, Olivia said hesitantly. The night before the wedding, I overheard Skylar talking on the phone with someone. I'm not sure who, but she said something like, after the honeymoon, we start phase 2. The old man will be so isolated, he'll sign anything to regain access to his son. I felt cold rage crystallizing in my chest. Phase 2. They were planning more. The expulsion from the wedding had only been the beginning. Thank you for telling me that, I said with a calm that surprised even myself. It will be useful. Olivia stood up, unsure. What do I do now? Now, I replied, standing too. You come with me to the notary public tomorrow and begin the process of choosing what kind of person you want to be. I hugged her then, the first physical contact since she had walked in. She clung to me like a little girl, sobbing into my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I know, honey. I know. On Monday, April 30th, at 8:30 a.m., my Mercedes drove through the streets of Atlanta toward the office of Notary Public Arthur Sterling on Avenue of the Americas. Olivia was in the passenger seat, silent but with visible determination in her upright posture. CJ followed us in his Lexus. Dax was already waiting for us in the building's parking lot when we arrived. The Notary Public's office occupied the 3rd floor of a restored historic building. Old stone walls contrasted with modern furniture. The secretary, an efficient woman in her 50s, ushered us into a spacious conference room with a solid mahogany table capable of seating 12 people. Notary Sterling was a meticulous 62-year-old man, metal-rimmed glasses, an impeccable gray suit. I knew him from previous business transactions. A man of few words, but absolute professionalism. Mr. Holloway, he greeted me with a formal handshake. Mr. Evans has briefed me on the nature of the documents we need to formalize today. It's a considerable agenda. It is, I confirmed, as we all took seats around the table. And I need everything to be absolutely legally shielded. For the next 4 hours, Notary Sterling guided a meticulous process of the complete restructuring of my assets. Dax had prepared the preliminary documentation, but each point required verification, reading aloud, and confirmation of understanding. First document, revocation of the previous will, dated March 2019. The notary read every clause of the old will before proceeding to its formal annulment. Listening aloud to how I had equally divided my assets between Julian and Olivia hurt in a way I hadn't anticipated. That will represented a version of reality where both my children valued me equally. Do you confirm that you wish to revoke this will in its entirety? Sterling asked. I confirm it, I replied with a firm voice. Second document, the new will. This one was considerably different. Olivia would inherit the family home, valued at $1.6 million. The 2 additional commercial properties, valued at $1.4 million total, would be sold upon my death, and the funds distributed into a trust for future grandchildren, if any, or donated to a specific charitable foundation, if not. And regarding Holloway Global Imports, LLC, the Notary Public asked. Creation of a family trust, Dax explained. 51% of the corporate shares will be transferred to a trust managed by a committee of 3 people, Olivia Holloway Reed, Clarence Jefferson, and a professional fiduciary firm, Global Wealth Management, No decision can be made without the approval of at least 2 of the 3 administrators, I added. And the remaining 49%, Sterling continued, taking notes, remains as liquid shares, distributable at the discretion of the trust. They can be sold, transferred, or maintained as determined by the administrators based on the interests of the assets. The notary looked up. This effectively eliminates any direct control by individual heirs over the company. Correct, I confirmed. The company I built for 40 years will not be a tool of manipulation for anyone. It will be protected, professionally managed, and its profits distributed according to objective criteria established in the trust. Olivia remained silent, but I saw a silvery tear slide down her cheek. She understood the weight of what she was witnessing, the formal disintegration of a family structure that had existed for decades. Third document. Powers of attorney. I revoked any previous power of attorney granted to Julian regarding medical or financial decisions in case of my incapacitation. New powers were granted exclusively to Olivia and Dax as co-representatives. This is a significant step, Sterling warned. In case of a medical emergency, your son, Julian, will not have the legal authority to make decisions on your behalf. That is exactly what I intend, I replied. I would not trust my life to someone who demonstrated so clearly that they do not value it. Fourth document, restructuring of shares in Holloway Global Imports, LLC, effective immediately, not after my death. This was the most complex one. Technically, it transferred 51% of my shares to the newly created trust, while I retained 49% as a minority shareholder, but with special management rights during my lifetime. This means, Dax explained, looking at Olivia, that your father is no longer the majority owner of his own company. Real control passes to the trust immediately. Why do it now and not after your death? Olivia asked, the first time she had spoken in hours. Because when Julian returns from his honeymoon, he will attempt what Olivia mentioned. Phase 2. To pressure me, manipulate me, possibly even legally challenge me. If the changes are already in effect, there is nothing he can do. There is no way to reverse it through emotional blackmail or legal maneuvers. CJ, who had remained a silent witness, nodded in approval. Fifth document, formal lawsuit against Vivian Wells. I had debated this at length with Dax. It accused my ex-wife of fraudulent use of alimony funds, conspiracy for undue influence, and parental alienation. It sought immediate cancellation of the monthly alimony payments and recovery of funds paid during the documented conspiracy period. This lawsuit, Sterling warned, will generate considerable legal conflict. Ms. Wells will undoubtedly hire aggressive representation. Let her, I replied coldly. I have photographic documentation, multiple testimonies, phone records. The truth is on my side. At 12:40 p.m., all documents were signed, sealed, and officially registered. The Sterling filed copies in secure notarial archives. Dax received the complete set for his legal records. I received certified copies of everything. Mr. Holloway, Sterling said as we prepared to leave, in 38 years as a notary public, I have witnessed many asset restructurings, but few as exhaustive and definitive as this. Are you absolutely sure of these decisions? I looked directly at him. Notary Sterling, 5 days ago, I was physically removed from my son's wedding by security guards under his express orders. I received no phone call, no explanation, no opportunity for defense, just brutal public humiliation. After that, how could I not be sure? Sterling nodded slowly. I understand. Then everything is in order. We left the building into the bright midday sun, which contrasted with the gravity of what we had just done. CJ said goodbye with a strong hug, promising continuous availability for whatever I needed. Dax left for his office to begin the process of filing the lawsuit against Vivian. Olivia and I stood next to my Mercedes. She looked exhausted, as if she had aged years in those few hours. Dad, she finally said, when Julian finds all this out, he's going to be furious, I completed. He's going to blame me. He will possibly attempt legal challenges that will fail. And eventually, maybe years later, he will understand that this was a direct consequence of his own decisions. And if he never understands? I opened the car door. Then he will live the rest of his life without understanding. That will be his burden, not mine. I drove Olivia back to her house in contemplative silence. When she got out, she briefly took my hand. "Thank you for giving me a second chance," she said. "Second chances are earned, Olivia. Make sure you deserve it." I drove back home, feeling a strange combination of exhaustion and relief. In a single morning, I had dismantled a 40-year asset structure and rebuilt it with a completely new architecture. There was no going back, and that, ironically, gave me peace. The following days passed in deliberate silence. Julian and Skylar were in the Maldives, enjoying their honeymoon on some paradise island, completely unaware of the legal earthquake that had reconfigured their future. I used that time to organize my life, my mind, and my next steps. Dax filed the lawsuit against Vivian on May 3rd. Her reaction was predictable. Furious phone calls that I ignored, threatening messages that I filed as additional evidence. But I knew the true moment of truth would come when Julian returned. On July 12th, 2024, exactly 11 weeks after his wedding, my phone vibrated with a call from a number I had been simultaneously anticipating and dreading. Julian. I looked at the screen for several rings before answering. "Hello, Julian," I said in a neutral voice. "Dad?" His tone was forcedly casual, as if nothing extraordinary had passed between us. "Can we meet? I need to talk to you about something important." "About what?" I asked, though I knew the answer perfectly. "I prefer to discuss it in person. Can I stop by your place this afternoon?" "No, we will meet at a neutral public location. Centennial Park Plaza Coffee Shop, 4 p.m. Brief silence. He had expected me to invite him home, familiar territory where he would feel comfortable. "Okay, I'll be there." I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes before the agreed time. I chose a corner table with good visibility, but relatively private. I ordered a black coffee and waited. At exactly 4 o'clock, I saw Julian walk in. He looked tanned from his Maldivian vacation, wearing a casual white shirt and jeans. He seemed relaxed, almost cheerful. That was about to change. He sat across from me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, you look good." "Julian," I replied, not returning his false cordiality. "You said you needed to discuss something important. I'm listening." His smile wavered slightly. "Well, Skylar and I were talking during the honeymoon about our future. We've decided to buy a bigger apartment, something where we can eventually raise a family. We found the perfect place in Inman Park, about a 1,300 square foot apartment, excellent views." "Congratulations," I said without any emotion. "The thing is, we need $500,000 for the down payment. With my savings and what Skylar has, we can cover the rest with a mortgage. I thought you could help us with that initial amount, as a loan or an inheritance advance, however you prefer to structure it." I watched him in silence for a long moment. He had the nerve to sit across from me 11 weeks after throwing me out of his wedding with armed guards, and ask me for $500,000 as if nothing had happened, as if he had an automatic right to my money. "How was the Maldives?" I asked, instead of answering his request. He seemed disconcerted by the change of subject. "It was beautiful. Santorini, Mykonos, Crete. Incredible. I'm genuinely glad." "And Skylar, how is she adapting to married life?" "She's fine, happy." "Dad, about the apartment. There's something I need to give you before we continue this conversation." I took a thick manila envelope from my briefcase and slid it across the table toward him. "Open it." Julian frowned but obeyed. Inside was a complete copy of Lee's dossier, dated photographs of Skylar and Vivian from March 2022, phone records, documentation of the orchestrated meeting at the coffee shop, all meticulously organized in chronological order, and at the end, those certified copies of the new will and corporate restructuring documents.
I watched. The color drained from his face as he turned each page. His hands began to tremble.
I can read the photograph of the casual encounter where he supposedly met Skylar with Vivian observing from a distant table. He froze. And in this time, he finally whispered, "It's the truth." And he replied, "It's a year conspiracy between your mother and your wife to manipulate you, separate me from you, and position themselves to control my assets. All verifiable, all legal, all true. This has to be a mistake. Mom and Skylar didn't know each other before page 7, March 2022, charity event at the Mandarin Oriental. Page 9, 37 telephone calls between April and July of that year. Page 15, joint visit to the notary public in May. My voice remained professionally neutral, as if I were presenting a business report. Julian continued to shake his head, stunned. There has to be an explanation. Maybe they met casually and didn't mention it to me. Why? Because they were actively conspiring to infiltrate your life and use our relationship as a tool for extortion. I took out a second envelope. This contains Olivia's testimony about conversations she overheard between Skylar and Vivian, specifically discussing plans to isolate me and then pressure me to sign anything to regain access to my son. Olivia would lie. Olivia is prepared to testify under oath, C.J. Jefferson and also. He saw them together in North Georgia in May 2022. How many independent witnesses do you need? Julian dropped the documents onto the table as if they burned him. Even if this were true, even if Mom and Skylar knew each other before, that doesn't mean everything was a conspiracy. Maybe I genuinely fell in love with her, and she casually spilled coffee on your documents exactly when you were walking by, with your mother watching from a distance like a scene director. I interrupted him. Julian, I respect you enough not to insult you by pretending you are that naive. His expression changed from shock to defensive anger. Fine. Let's assume you're right. Let's assume Skylar approached me intentionally. Great. Does that invalidate our feelings, the months we spent together, the love we built? That's a question you'll have to answer yourself, Ambrose said, softly. But before you do, keep reading the envelope, the last pages. He did, finally reaching the notary public's documents. I saw the exact moment he grasped the implications. His face went from confusion to absolute disbelief. You took me out of your will? He said, his voice strangled. I removed you from my will. I transferred control of the company to a trust in which you have no involvement. I revoked any legal power you might have had over my decisions. I recited the facts clinically. All legally executed on April 30th. Notarized. Irreversible. You can't do that. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. Other customers in the coffee shop turned to look. This is revenge. You're punishing me for marrying who I chose. Sit down, I ordered, in a quiet but authoritative voice that I had perfected in 40 years of managing employees. And lower your voice. To my surprise, he obeyed, picking up the chair and sitting down again, although he was shaking with fury. Julian, I continued, with the same deadly calm, let me ask you a very simple question.
Before putting security guards with my photograph at the entrance of your wedding, with instructions to physically remove me, did you ever come to talk to me? Did you ask me my side of any accusation they had fed you? Did you give me a chance to defend myself? Silence. Answer the question. Skylar told me that you were against, he began weakly. I didn't ask you what Skylar told you. I asked if you came to verify with your 67-year-old father before publicly humiliating him. His eyes filled with tears. No. Correct. You did not. And that decision, son, has permanent consequences. Julian sat across from me with tears rolling down his cheeks. The documents scattered on the table between us like irrefutable evidence of his betrayal and my consequences. I waited in silence. This was his opportunity to speak, to explain himself, to show me if there was anything left of the son I had raised beneath the layers of manipulation. Skylar told me that you were against our marriage, he began, his voice broken. She said you had made derogatory comments about her family, her work, her education level, that you called her a gold digger when she wasn't present. And you believed her without questioning? I asked, maintaining a neutral tone. Mom confirmed it. She told me she had heard those comments directly from you, that you were furious because Skylar didn't come from a wealthy family like the other fiancés I'd had. Julian, in 38 years of your life, have I ever expressed prejudice against anyone based on their economic background? Did I ever teach you that a person's worth is measured by their bank account? He slowly shook his head. Your grandfather, my father, was a mechanic. He worked with his hands his whole life. I built my company from a floor salesman to an owner. Did you really believe I would become a snob who despises a yoga instructor for her profession? When both Skylar and Mom told me, his voice faded. When two people who turned out to be conspiring together for 2 years told you the exact same coordinated story, you accepted that narrative without verifying it, with the only person who could have denied or confirmed it, me. I let that sink in. Why? Because I trusted them, he admitted miserably. But you didn't trust me. Your father, the man who raised you, paid for your education, and supported you unconditionally for 38 years, didn't deserve 5 minutes of your time for a conversation before you threw me out of your wedding like a criminal. Julian buried his face in his hands. My God, what have I done? You have learned a painful lesson about blind trust and independent verification. You have discovered that people can lie convincingly when they have sufficient financial motivation, and you have lost your inheritance in the process. He looked up abruptly. Is that all that matters? Punishing me economically? No, I replied firmly. If this were only about money, I would have simply modified the percentages in my will. What I did was much deeper. I removed you completely because you showed zero respect for me as a person. The money is a consequence, not the objective. I can fix it, he said desperately. I'll talk to Skylar. I'll confront Mom. I'll find out the complete truth. You already know the complete truth. It is documented in those papers in front of you. Then I'll apologize publicly if necessary. I'll do whatever it takes to regain your trust. I looked at him for a long time, seeing traces of the boy he had been beneath the features of the man he had become. Julian, some things in life are not recovered simply by apologizing. Trust built over decades is destroyed in seconds, and it takes decades more to rebuild, if it's even possible. Are you telling me you'll never forgive me? I'm telling you that forgiveness and restoration are different things. I can eventually forgive you for being manipulated, for being naive, even for humiliating me. But restoring our relationship to what it was requires more than repentance. It requires you to demonstrate with sustained actions for years that you truly understand the magnitude of what you destroyed. Years, he repeated with horror. Julian, they planned this for 2 years. Did you expect me to forget it in 2 weeks? He leaned back in his chair, defeated. And in the meantime, you just cut me out of your life. I didn't cut you out. You cut me out. I am simply protecting what remains. I took a sip of my now cold coffee. But there's something else you need to understand about those documents there. What else could there be? He asked bitterly. Page 32. Lawsuit against your mother for fraudulent use of alimony. He frantically searched until he found it. He read quickly, progressively paling. You're suing Mom for $540,000 plus $160,000 in legal costs, $15,000 a month for 36 months of documented conspiracy. She used money I provided to finance an operation aimed at destroying my relationship with you. That constitutes fraud. But that will financially ruin her. She should have considered that before conspiring. Actions have consequences, Julian. It's a lesson that both you and your mother are going to learn together. And Skylar? He asked, his voice barely audible. What do I do with her? That's a decision only you can make. But I suggest you consider this. Now that she knows, there's no millionaire inheritance waiting for you, no easy access to a family company, that everything has been restructured so that you will never control my assets. How long do you think she will remain interested? I saw a horrible comprehension cross his face. She married me for money? I can't confirm her internal motivations. I can only point out documented facts and allow you to draw conclusions. Julian gathered all the documents back into the envelope with trembling hands. What am I supposed to do now? I stood up, leaving $20 on the table to cover the coffees. Now you live with the consequences of your decisions. You work your normal job without the safety net of a family inheritance. You observe how your wife reacts when she realizes that marrying you didn't make her a millionaire. And if you have enough luck and wisdom, you learn who you are when everything around you falls apart. Dad, please, he began, reaching for my arm. I stopped, but didn't turn to fully. Julian, I was physically thrown out of my son's wedding by guards who treated me like a threat. I was humiliated in front of family, friends, and acquaintances. That wound almost doesn't heal with an hour's conversation in a coffee shop. So this is it? I don't have a father anymore? Finally, I turned toward him. You will always be my son. That doesn't change biologically. But a father-son relationship based on mutual respect, trust, and communication. That died when you chose to believe lies about me without giving me a voice. If you want to rebuild it, you will have to start from completely new foundations. And that, son, takes time that I'm not sure you have the patience to invest. I'll do whatever it takes, he said with sudden determination. Then start by being honest with yourself about your marriage. Start by asking yourself difficult questions about the people you have trusted. And when you have real answers, not the ones you want to hear, but the true ones, then maybe we can talk again. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him there, surrounded by the evidence of his own naivety. I didn't look back. Part of me wanted to turn around, to see if he looked as broken as I had felt in front of those wedding doors. But I didn't. Some lessons have to hurt to truly be learned. I drove home with a mind curiously calm. The conversation had been as difficult as I had anticipated, but also necessary. Julian now knew the complete truth. What he did with that information would determine his true character. When I reached my driveway, I saw an unfamiliar car parked in front of my house. A young woman got out as I approached. It was Skylar. Her expression was cold, calculating, very different from the artificial sweetness she had shown for months. "Mr. Holloway," she said without preamble, "we need to talk," and I smiled without humor. Phase 2 was starting exactly as Olivia had warned. "Indeed, Skylar. Indeed. We do need to talk." I didn't invite Skylar into my house. We remained standing in the driveway under the scorching July sun, and this was deliberate. I wanted her to feel uncomfortable, out of her element, without the control she had exerted for so long from the shadows. "I assume Julian showed you the documents," I said, crossing my arms. "I saw them," she replied, her voice devoid of the fake sweetness she had used for months. This was the real Skylar, cold, calculating, furious at having been discovered. "And I came to tell you that you are making a monumental mistake." "A mistake? Documenting a 2-year conspiracy is simply reasonable precaution. Call it whatever you want, but ruining your own son's future because of hurt pride is pathetic." Her green eyes gleamed with barely contained contempt. "Julian is your blood. Are you really going to punish him for falling in love with the wrong person? According to your criteria, Julian is not being punished for falling in love. He is experiencing the consequences of throwing me out of his wedding without even asking for my side. There's a difference." Skylar took a step toward me, her posture aggressive. "Look, Mr. Holloway, and I know how the real world works. Families make arrangements. Parents provide for their children because it's the right thing to do, not because the children are perfect. You have $7 million. Are you really going to deny your only son his share because of a spiteful old man's tantrum?" The mask had completely fallen. There was no longer any pretense of respect, family affection, or anything except naked greed. "Fascinating," I said calmly. "You've just confirmed everything the investigator documented. You knew the exact value of my assets, down to the last dollar. How would that be possible for a yoga instructor who supposedly casually fell in love with my son?" She hesitated briefly, but recovered quickly. "Julian told me about his finances. That's normal between couples. Except those documents are dated before you and Julian even officially met, before the coffee-spilling theater with Vivian observing from the corner. I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. And now that you know there is no inheritance waiting for you, no control of the company, that Julian will live on an average employee's salary for the rest of his life, without my financial backing, how long do you calculate you will remain in this marriage? 6 months? 1 year?" Her face hardened. "I love Julian. You loved what he represented, access to a fortune through strategic marriage. But that plan died when I signed the notarial documents. Now, you are only left with an ordinary man with ordinary income and an ordinary future. You are trying to destroy our marriage. Your marriage destroyed itself when it was built on lies and conspiracy. I merely revealed the rotten foundations." I took a step toward her now, reversing the power dynamic. "But here's something you should know, Skylar. I also filed a lawsuit against Vivian, $540,000 plus legal costs. When that trial concludes, and it will conclude in my favor, because the evidence is irrefutable, your conspirator partner will be financially ruined." "How much did she promise you of my assets? 20%? 30? Whatever the number, It is now 0. I saw cold calculation working behind her eyes. She was recalculating options, evaluating exits, planning the next move. She was a predator, trapped, and she knew it. Julian will tell me everything, she finally said. About his company, his accounts, everything. I have conjugal rights. Go ahead. 49% of the shares in a company controlled by a trust administered by a committee that does not include Julian. Modest personal accounts, property that rents out. His personal net worth is approximately $80,000. Enjoy your conjugal share of that. Fury briefly replaced calculation in her expression. You're a bitter old man who can't stand to see his son happy. I'm a father protecting himself from conspirators. There's a difference. My voice remained deadly calm. Skylar, do yourself a favor. When you decide to divorce Julian, because we both know you will, do it quickly and cleanly. Don't drag this out unnecessarily. You've already done enough damage. Who says I'll divorce him? Your body language? Your tone? The way you evaluated every word I said? Looking for a financial angle? You're a good actress. I admit it. You fooled my son for months. But I've spent 40 years reading people in business negotiations. I know when someone is calculating an exit. She turned toward her car without another word, her heels aggressively hitting the pavement. But before getting in, she turned one last time. Julian will hate you for this. Perhaps, but eventually he will understand that I saved him from years of fraudulent marriage. And that understanding, when it comes, will be worth more than his temporary hatred. I watched her drive away with unnecessary acceleration, tires squealing. Phase 2 had lasted less than 10 minutes. I had expected more elaborate threats, more sophisticated manipulation, but Skylar had shown her hand too soon, too obviously. It was a sign of desperation. 3 months passed. October 2024. The leaves began to fall from the trees in my yard, creating a golden carpet that I walked on every morning during my strolls. The lawsuit against Vivian was advancing slowly but surely. Dax reported weekly progress, preliminary hearings, presentation of evidence, testimonies from CJ and Olivia that solidified our case. Julian did not contact me during that time. According to Olivia, who maintained limited contact with her brother, his marriage was visibly deteriorating. Skylar had begun going out alone frequently, refused family invitations, and constantly mentioned financial limitations in an accusatory tone. In December, the call I had anticipated arrived, Dax with the final news on the case. Eli, the judge ruled in your favor. Vivian must return $540,000 plus $160,000 in legal costs. She has 6 months to pay it or face asset seizure. Did she appeal? Her lawyer advised against it. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs, multiple testimonies, phone records. She had no defense. Christmas 2024 arrived quietly. For the first time in 38 years, I didn't receive a call from Julian wishing me happy holidays. But Olivia came with her family. CJ joined us. I prepared an elaborate dinner in my kitchen, which had felt too empty for months. Have you heard anything from Julian? Olivia asked as we were pouring wine after dinner. Nothing. You? He called me 2 weeks ago. Skylar filed for divorce. Apparently, she met someone with a better financial situation. Olivia paused. Julian sounded devastated. Dad, he asked about you. What did you tell him? That you loved him, but that he had destroyed something that would take years to rebuild. That it wasn't too late to start, but that it required genuine humility that I wasn't sure he had yet. I nodded slowly. That was wise. Do you miss him? She asked softly. I miss the son I thought I had. The man he turned out to be. That man I need to get to know from scratch before I can appropriately miss him. On December 26th, I found an envelope in my mailbox. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Julian. I took it inside and left it on the table for an hour before opening it. Finally, with hot coffee and quiet determination, I broke the seal. The letter was handwritten, 3 full pages in shaky calligraphy. Dad, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if I have earned the right for you to read it, but I need to try. Skylar filed for divorce. Mom lost the lawsuit and asked me for money that I don't have. My life fell apart exactly as you predicted, and amidst the ruins, I finally see the complete truth. Not just about them, but about myself. My cowardice, my naivety, my willingness to believe the worst about you without questioning it. You taught me to verify information, to seek multiple sources, to not accept single narratives without evidence. I failed to apply those lessons when they mattered most. I publicly humiliated you without giving you a voice. That is unforgivable. And I am not seeking forgiveness. I am seeking the opportunity to start earning, one day at a time for the rest of my life, the possibility of calling you Dad again with honor. If that door is permanently closed, I understand. But if there is a microscopic sliver of possibility, I promise to dedicate every day to widening it with actions, not words. I will love you eternally, Julian. I folded the letter slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply stored it in my desk drawer along with all the other important letters of my life. Someday, perhaps in months or years, I would answer, but not today. Today I simply lived with the peace of knowing that some lessons, no matter how painful, are the only ones that truly transform souls. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect, and